finally. It was morning time on January 28th in the year 1917 that a Mexican maid named Carmelita Torres refuses to put up with the indignity she has been made to suffer every morning since she started working across the border in the U.S. Torres's objection to the noxious chemical delusion visited upon Mexicans upon crossing the northern border sparked what became known as the Bath Riots, an oft-overlooked moment in Chicano history. Scared that a recent outbreak of typhus in Mexico could find its way to the United States, the Public Health Service instituted mandatory disinfecting for all Mexicans entering the country. The process was both humiliating and dangerous. Men and women were directed to separate facilities where they were made to strip off their clothes, which would be steamed. Officials examined the nude border crossers and frequently doused them in harmful chemicals such as kerosene, a method which had resulted in the continuance of eternity of 27 prisoners in an El Paso prison in 1916. Having heard that workers at the facility would regularly photograph women in the nude as they underwent the process, 17-year-old Torres refused to leave the trolley as it stopped at the Santa Fe Bridge border facility. Torres and her fellow passengers, most of whom were also young female domestic workers, quickly seized 4 trolleys, hurling whatever they could find at the American authorities. A number of other Juarez residents joined them, and the ensuing riots lasted through the next day, although no one seemed to have been seriously injured, and there were only a few arrests. Despite the riot, American officials continued with chemical disinfecting into the 1950s. In addition to these decades of indignity, another effect of their action was to inadvertently inspire the gas chambers, a term Americans applied to the El Paso facilities at the time, used by the Nazis during the Holocaust. In 1938, a German scientific journal studied and praised the methods employed at El Paso, including the use of Zyklon B. The same chemical, as well as similar chambers, would become key components of the Nazi death camps. It was January 28th in the year 1985 that the music stars of the world get together to record We Are the World. The special instruction Quincy Jones sent out to several dozen pop stars invited to participate in the recording of We Are the World was this, quote, "Check your egos at the door," unquote. Jones was the producer of a record that would eventually go on to sell more than 7 million copies and raise more than $60 million for African famine relief. But before We Are the World could achieve those feats, it had to be captured on tape. No simple feat, considering the number of major recording artists slated to participate. With only one chance to get the recording the way he and songwriters Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie wanted it, Jones convened the marathon recording session of We Are the World at around 10 p.m. on the evening of January 28, 1985, immediately following the conclusion of the American Music Awards ceremony held just a few miles away. Singer, actor, activist Harry Belafonte was the initiator of the events that led to the recording of We Are the World. Inspired by the recent success of Do They Know It's Christmas, the multi-million selling charity record by the British-Irish collective Band Aid, Belafonte talked Richie, Jackson, and Jones into helping him organize an American response under the name USA for Africa. Richie and Jackson wrote the song over the course of several days in January, and Belafonte's manager, Ken Cragen, who would go on to serve as president of the USA for Africa Foundation, the nonprofit organization that managed the profits from We Are the World, came up with a plan to hold the session on the night of the AMAs in order to guarantee the greatest number of big names would be able to participate. Among the 45 stars who sang We Are the World that night were huge in the 80s figures like Cyndi Lauper and Huey Lewis, country stars like Kenny Rogers and Willie Nelson, pop icons like Smokey Robinson, Tina Turner, and Paul Simon, and musical giants like Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, and Bob Dylan. Also in the studio that night were half of the Jackson family, one Irishman, Bob Geldof, co-organizer of Band Aid, and one party-crashing Canadian comedian, Dan Aykroyd. Egos fully in check, the group laid down the chorus and solos before sunrise on the 29th, and We Are the World was in stores and on the airwaves just 5 weeks later. At 11:38 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 28th in 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifts off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and Krista McAuliffe is on her way to becoming the first ordinary U.S. civilian to travel into space. McAuliffe, a 37-year-old high school social studies teacher from New Hampshire, won a competition that earned her a place among the 7-member crew of the Challenger. She underwent months of shuttle training, but then beginning January 23rd, was forced to wait 6 long days as the Challenger's launch countdown was repeatedly delayed because of weather and technical problems. Finally, on January 28th, the shuttle lifted off. 73 seconds later, hundreds on the ground, including Krista's family, stared in disbelief as the shuttle broke up in a forking plume of smoke and fire. Millions more watched the wrenching tragedy unfold on live television. All passengers aboard the ship continued their eternity. In 1976, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration unveiled the world's first reusable manned spacecraft, the Enterprise. 5 years later, space flights of the shuttle began when Columbia traveled into space on a 54-hour mission. Launched by 2 solid rocket boosters and an external tank, only the aircraft-like shuttle entered into orbit around Earth. When the mission was completed, the shuttle fired engines to reduce speed, and after descending through the atmosphere, landed like a glider. Early shuttles took satellite equipment into space and carried out various scientific experiments. The Challenger disaster was the first major shuttle accident. In the aftermath of the disaster, our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, appointed a special commission to determine what went wrong with the Challenger and to develop future corrective measures. The Presidential Commission was headed by former Secretary of State William Rogers and included former astronaut Neil Armstrong and former test pilot Chuck Yeager. The investigation determined that the disaster was caused by the failure of an O-ring seal in one of the 2 solid fuel rockets. The elastic O-ring did not respond as expected because of the cold temperature at launch time, which began a chain of events that resulted in the massive loss. As a result, NASA did not send astronauts into space for more than 2 years as it redesigned a number of features in the space shuttle. In September of 1988, space shuttle flights resumed with the successful launching of the Discovery. Since then, the space shuttle has carried out numerous important missions, such as the repair and maintenance of the Hubble Space Telescope and the construction of the International Space Station. On February 1st in the year 2003, a second space shuttle disaster rocked the U.S. when Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry of the Earth's atmosphere. All aboard continued their eternity. Despite fears that the problems that downed Columbia had not been satisfactorily addressed, space shuttle flights resumed on July 26 in 2005 when Discovery was again put into orbit. The space shuttle program formally ended on August 31st in 2011 after its final mission, STS-135, flown by Atlantis in June of 2011.